Jasmine Crockett walked on to The View with a single mission: to turn the tables. Whoopi Goldberg tried to trap her with accusations of weaponizing race and identity, but Jasmine wasn't here for that. She delivered one line, and suddenly the entire studio was silent. What started as a heated debate became something else, a moment of reckoning. This wasn't an accident. Earlier that day, Jasmine had torn apart a senior committee member in a congressional hearing. The media caught every word, but they missed the real story. Jasmine carries a weight others can't even imagine. Every day she has to be sharper, stronger, and more strategic just to be heard. Then came the email. The View thought they were inviting a firestorm for ratings. But what they didn't see was that Jasmine wasn't here to be anyone's pawn. She wasn't here for the drama. They thought they were summoning a storm, but the storm was already waiting backstage, silent, composed, and utterly unstoppable. Backstage, Jasmine felt it. The tension was palpable, but it wasn't the AC. She could feel the weight of the stares, the smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. She sat in front of the mirror, not just fixing her makeup, but seeing through the facade of the people who thought they already knew her. And Jasmine Crockett walked into The View, and of course, no one bothered with the usual pleasantries. No one asked about her work in Congress. No, how's the Capitol Hill grind? Just pure silence, like they were all waiting for her to play a part. But guess what? Jasmine wasn't there to follow anyone's script. She was there to throw that script out the window. As a production assistant breezed by, she muttered under her breath, "They're expecting fireworks." She's going to play the angry black woman card. It wasn't hatred, though. No, it was the worst thing. Boredom. Like they'd already decided how this was going to go. And she was just another checkbox on a list of women to be framed for drama. Jasmine? She didn't flinch. Instead, she let that little comment simmer for a second, then casually dropped the truth bomb. If they brought me here expecting a performance, they're going to be shocked when the truth doesn't follow the script. And just like that, the air shifted. Her calm tone didn't fit the narrative they'd prepared. But underneath it, steel. She'd been underestimated, boxed in, forced to play nice for years, but no more. Whoopi Goldberg was sitting there, eyes locked, ready for a confrontation. But Jasmine, she was the one in control. She had been in enough rooms to know when the trapdoor was coming, and today it wasn't going to catch her off guard, and it was coming. You could feel the shift the second Whoopi's gaze hardened. The friendly host was gone. Now Jasmine was the target. The energy in the room flipped. Quiet co-hosts, the tension rising. The silence that followed wasn't planned. It was raw, real, and Jasmine felt it. She knew what was coming. Then Whoopi leaned in, and you could feel the temperature drop. "You're a lawyer, a congresswoman, a woman of color," Whoopi began. Each phrase like a calculated move, respectful, yet loaded. "But do you ever think maybe you're building a brand more than real policy? That maybe you're using your identity more than your ideas?" The words hit hard, sharp. The question wasn't just a question, it was an accusation, a challenge. And the room responded with a silence that screamed for Jasmine to answer on their terms. And then the applause came, but Jasmine wasn't fooled. It wasn't genuine. It wasn't earned. It was the kind of applause that comes when the audience already knows what's coming next. The View had been here before, and they were ready for their usual script, but Jasmine wasn't there to follow it. She was there to change it, to show them all that she wasn't just another act in their show. She was rewriting the narrative. A few sound bites later, and sure enough, it was viral, just like they hoped. Familiar, predictable. They thought they had Jasmine cornered, trapped with a question so sharp it seemed like there was no way out. The accusation was clear. Her identity wasn't something she'd earned. It was just a brand. They thought they were about to get their dramatic moment, the takedown, but Jasmine, she didn't flinch. She sat there calm and collected, her hands resting lightly on the table, breathing steady. There was no discomfort, no sign of her getting rattled. Where they wanted her to react, she just gave them quiet. Where they hoped for fire, she gave them cool silence. And as the applause rolled in, she didn't hurry to speak. She let the room burn off its nervous energy. She didn't need to be part of the performance they wanted. She'd seen it all before, just not under studio lights, the moment when the audience cheers for the question, but not the answer. When they reward the question's bite, not the courage to respond. And then slowly, Jasmine turned her head towards the camera, not to Whoopi, not to the other co-hosts, but straight into the lens, into the homes of millions, into the eyes of people who had been told their identity was a brand, that their struggles were a show for others. Her voice, as calm as ever, pierced through the silence. "I don't carry my blackness as a weapon," she said. "I carry it as a record of survival." It didn't need to be loud. The truth was undeniable. Jasmine's words landed like a blow, settling into the room with a weight that was felt by everyone present. They weren't just words, they were a presence, ancient, heavy, as if time itself had stopped, and now all that was left was the silence that followed. The room didn't react at first. No applause, no agreement, just a profound stillness. It wasn't the kind of silence that means you're unsure of what's next. It was the kind that hits you like cold steel and makes you realize something has shifted beyond repair. Jasmine had flipped the script. It wasn't a sharp retort. It wasn't an angry response. It was a declaration of something much deeper, much more dangerous to the narrative they wanted to control. One sentence, but a truth too raw to be ignored. One that nobody saw coming. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was charged, crackling with the energy of realization. The room, frozen in that moment, knew something had changed. It wasn't just about Jasmine anymore. It was about everything they thought they knew and now couldn't unsee. Not a single word was spoken, not by Whoopi, not by anyone else. This silence wasn't just a pause, it was sacred, a space where the air was thick with meaning. Jasmine hadn't needed to raise her voice. She had changed the room simply by being present, by speaking a truth no one could deny. The applause sign, meant to prompt the crowd, flickered as though it wasn't sure how to behave. The audience waited for Whoopi to take control again, to reframe the moment, to soften the blow. But nothing came. There was no softening this. And then Whoopi leaned in. Her voice, now stripped of any diplomacy, was harder, quicker. "So, you keep talking about discrimination?" she snapped, the rhythm quickening with a bite. "You say these things on every stage you get, but what are you doing to actually unite people, to build anything?" It wasn't just a question, it was a dare, served cold. Whoopi wasn't interested in debating ideas. She was testing Jasmine's mettle. "Pain is real," she seemed to say, "but keep it to yourself. Justice matters, unless it ruffles feathers. Your truth? Only if it comes wrapped in a bow of unity. Otherwise, we don't want it." The crowd shifted, not because Whoopi was right, but because she'd made the unspoken demand. Jasmine needed to cross the line. The question was clear. What's all this talk about discrimination really doing for people? Jasmine didn't respond immediately. She didn't bite. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she took a slow, deliberate breath. She wasn't about to play their game. She was about to make them listen. "Let me tell you a true story," she said, her voice calm but heavy with intention. "A boy named Darnell, 14 years old, arrested in Dallas County for standing outside a gas station where something happened 10 minutes earlier. No weapon, no stolen goods, no evidence. Just a black kid in a hoodie." She paused for a moment, letting the silence build, feeling the tension spike. His bail was set at $1,200, just enough to keep him locked up if his family couldn't find it. She let the words land unceremoniously and waited as the weight of the truth sunk into the room. There was no snappy comeback, no soundbite, just reality. His mother working 2 jobs, fast food, cleaning houses, his father long gone. They begged, they called, but the money, yeah, it never came. Jasmine's voice dropped as if to say, so he sat in detention. 2 years, 14 years old, locked up for over 700 days with no trial, no conviction, because apparently being poor equals being guilty. The silence, not the polite kind. It was the kind of silence that lingers and festers, a heavy, uncomfortable cloud. The applause sign, not a flicker, no movement, nothing. Jasmine leaned in, her voice low but cutting. So you ask me what talking about discrimination does. It reminds people that Darnell existed, that he mattered, that this isn't just some debate for ratings. It's about a kid who missed his entire 9th grade year, locked in a cell that smelled like bleach and concrete. And it's people like me who refuse to let this country pretend it never happened. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was the kind of silence that makes you feel like you've done something you can't undo. The cameras didn't dare move. The room didn't dare react. Jasmine had spoken the truth, and there was no escaping it now. If unity means silence in the face of injustice, then I choose to stand alone. Her words landed not with force, but with an undeniable presence. They were calm, steady, rooted in something far deeper than mere rhetoric. The room stilled. The air itself felt too thick, the lights too glaring. The silence that followed was more than just an absence of sound. It was the weight of truth sinking into the cracks of the carefully curated performance. A few uncertain claps came, half-hearted and out of sync, as the audience tried to catch up with the gravity of what had just been said. This wasn't for applause. Jasmine wasn't here to entertain or please. She had drawn a line in the sand, an unequivocal statement that would echo long after the applause had died. What had started as a scripted moment of media manipulation had turned into a real raw declaration. It was the kind of shift that could be felt in the air, subtle but seismic. Whoopi's gaze tightened, no longer in the playful sparring mode, but as a strategist recalibrating. Her co-hosts exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do next. The stage manager hesitated, their command over the moment slipping. Jasmine had taken the wheel, and there was no turning back. Jasmine wasn't adhering to the rules. She wasn't playing the part of the angry, emotional politician they had anticipated. Instead, she was doing something much more dangerous. She was speaking truth, daring everyone to confront it. The air in the studio grew tense, as if something was about to snap. Her words reverberated through the silence, and for the first time, Whoopi wasn't the one holding the reins of the conversation. Whoopi sat up straighter, her eyes sharpening. She'd lost the room once, and she wasn't about to let that happen again. This wasn't just a guest making noise. It was someone disrupting the entire narrative, rewriting the story in real time. So Whoopi responded with calculated precision, stripping her tone of warmth and layering it with sarcasm. And what exactly do you think you represent? Whoopi's voice was laced with a deliberate edge. You've been in Congress, what, a year? She leaned forward, eyebrows arched, her challenge clear. This isn't Twitter. This is the real world. The audience's laughter was faint, uneasy, a collective response that wasn't sure how to interpret what had just been said. It was the sound of an audience uncertain of its place in this new dynamic. The implication was clear. Jasmine was too young, too brash, too new to speak with authority. Whoopi's words were a calculated dismissal, a suggestion that Jasmine was nothing more than a fleeting hashtag. not a real political force. It wasn't a challenge to her ideas. It was an attempt to invalidate her very existence in this room. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't get rattled. Her silence wasn't a retreat. It was an ironclad statement. She didn't rush to respond. When she spoke, it was slow, deliberate, like truth steadily moving through the room while everything else tried to catch up. "I don't represent Twitter," she said, her gaze unwavering, voice firm and piercing. "I represent the mother whose door was kicked in at 5 a.m. while her kids were still asleep. I represent the woman who lost her home before the sun was even up, while the world obsessed over celebrity breakups and pumpkin spice lattes, but never once mentioned her name. Her words didn't come for applause. They came for reality, a reality that rarely made it onto TV screens, one that didn't go viral but destroyed lives. Jasmine wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for the ones whose voices would never be amplified in this space. She wasn't here for permission. She was here to make sure that they were seen. The room froze. It wasn't just the weight of her words. It was the silence that followed, a silence that no one seemed ready for. Jasmine hadn't shouted, hadn't raised her voice, but her words had shifted the entire temperature of the room. No one knew how to react. A co-host, sensing the shift, jumped in, trying to seize the narrative. But it was too late. The truth had already been said, and it wasn't going anywhere. "That's a powerful story," the co-host said, that tight smile on her face barely hiding the contempt. "But in reality, what have you actually done? Stories are one thing, but have you even passed a single law?" And there it was, the trap set. The same old game, the same old rules. The question wasn't innocent. It wasn't seeking understanding. It was a shot fired to push Jasmine back into a corner. The insinuation was clear. Your lived experience doesn't count. Your truth doesn't matter unless you can tick boxes, fill out forms, and churn out legislation like an assembly line, as if the only real victories were signed laws. But Jasmine knew better. She knew her value wasn't defined by what the system deemed important. She wasn't some political pawn to be judged by a bill count. She was real. Her story was real. And if they wanted to reduce her to a piece of paper, they could. But she wasn't going to let them. Not today. The question hit hard, like a punch, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She had been reduced to numbers too many times in her life. This wasn't her fight to win on their terms. It wasn't about the laws. It was about the lives they affected. And that's something no one could ever quantify. As if the value of her impact could only be validated through legislation signed by the president. As if the work she did outside of those formal structures didn't matter in a deeply partisan system that often failed to function. The audience was visibly divided. Some nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably. Most were waiting for Jasmine to slip up, to show some weakness, some proof that the work she'd done hadn't been enough. But instead of responding to their expectations, Jasmine simply reached down and pulled a well-worn folder from beside her chair. The folder hit the table with a muted thud, drawing everyone's attention. There was no grandstanding, no flourish. Just a heavy, deliberate silence. The contents of the folder were simple. 17 pieces of proposed legislation. Bills Jasmine had written, sponsored, and fought for. Bills that had gone nowhere. Not because they weren't viable, but because the political machinery that could have brought them to life was simply too clogged with indifference, buried under procedural delays. It was a quiet statement, a reminder that the lack of progress wasn't a result of her failure, but the systemic forces designed to block real change. Housing equity for displaced families, maternal health protections for Black mothers, dying at 3 times the national rate, bail reform for kids like Darnell, environmental cleanup in towns where toxins linger longer than opportunity, accountability for law enforcement that needs to face justice, real school funding, clean water, mandates for poison zip codes that never make the headlines. 17 attempts, 17 times the system ignored her. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't look angry. She looked determined, unshakable in her truth. Her hand didn't move in a panic. She didn't scramble for an excuse. She reached for the folder, slow, deliberate, and set it down with purpose. It wasn't for dramatic effect. It was for clarity. "I'm not lacking in effort," she said, eyes unwavering, her voice steady and commanding. "Congress is just lacking ears to listen." There was no applause, no sudden swell of emotion, just the sound of truth hitting its mark, and the silence that followed spoke volumes. This wasn't about spectacle. This was about facts, and the audience knew it. The co-host, all polished professionalism, couldn't move. She blinked twice, suddenly aware that the question she'd thrown out was now staring back at her, reflecting her own complicity in a system that demands the oppressed prove their worthiness with paperwork. Jasmine didn't just answer. She exposed the questioner, flipping the power dynamic. She wasn't begging for anything. She wasn't pleading for respect. No, Jasmine was showing the receipts, daring anyone to ignore them. The folder lay open in front of her, the weight of its contents pressing down on everyone in that room, undeniable, immovable. The words still hung like a blade, suspended in the air, sharp and clear. Congress is just lacking ears to listen. There was no shouting, no emotional outburst. It wasn't about volume. It was about truth. And Jasmine wasn't asking to be heard. She simply stated it. And with that one sentence, the onus was now on the others to listen, to truly listen. Whoopi, always sharp, always quick, froze. Her pen fell from her hand, and for a brief moment, even she seemed lost. The cameras were rolling, but the moment wasn't scripted. She glanced to the producer, to the cue cards, but there was nothing. Jasmine's truth had built a wall, one that no amount of glib words could tear down. Next to her, the co-host's gaze was glued to the paper in front of her, but it wasn't the words she was seeing. She was retreating, her smile fading like the last light of day. The script, once a trusted guide, now felt like an anchor, pulling her down beneath the weight of Jasmine's unrelenting presence. The practiced half-smile was gone, replaced by an expression of realization. She was no longer in control of the moment. The camera moved almost cautiously across the front row of the audience. It wasn't the usual eager scan, but something slower, more deliberate. The faces in the crowd weren't offering the usual signals of approval. Instead, there were eyes locked, bodies still. Some leaned forward, but not with excitement, more like they were trying to grasp something they hadn't expected. Others leaned back, uncertain. A few older men nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in recognition, as if they understood something beyond the words. And then, in the midst of that tension, Jasmine turned. She didn't turn toward Whoopi nor the other hosts. She turned directly toward the camera. The lens found her. Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She stared straight through it, defying the lens, refusing to be framed or controlled. The moment wasn't for them anymore. It was hers. And then, without drama or flair, Jasmine spoke the truth. Simple, clear, and powerful. The truth cannot be silenced. It wasn't for applause. It wasn't a stunt. It was a statement, a challenge, really a challenge to every executive, every producer, and every host who thought they could control the narrative. She wasn't just calling them out. She was warning them. This wasn't about making a moment go viral. It wasn't about getting likes or shares. It was about standing firm in the face of a system that thrives on packaging pain for profit, that believes it can script truth. Jasmine wasn't playing by those rules. The truth she spoke wasn't going to be edited out. No matter how much they tried to spin it, No matter how much they tried to laugh it off, she had set the record straight. And when the lights dimmed and the studio cleared, everyone knew the game had changed. That clip, raw and unfiltered, spread like wildfire. It didn't need any editing. It didn't need any flashy effects. People shared it because it wasn't just political, it was real. And for once, the truth couldn't be swept under the rug. She didn't shout. She didn't raise her voice in protest or plead for validation. Jasmine spoke simply, calmly, and with such undeniable truth that the world had no choice but to listen. By noon, conservative voices were in a frenzy, dissecting her every word, not to discredit, but to understand how she had done what few had. Take the high ground and ignite it. One conservative host reluctantly confessed, "I don't agree with a word of her policy, but damn it, she owned that room." And on a libertarian network, a tweet simply read, "Finally, someone who talks like she's not auditioning for power." But it wasn't just the right that was taken aback. Liberal commentators scrambled to fit Jasmine into their well-worn boxes. She was a Democrat, but she didn't play the game. She was a black woman, but refused to let anyone define her. Her courage was praised by some, while others rushed to call her divisive. But the public wasn't listening to the pundits anymore. They weren't watching to hear policies or platforms. They were watching for something different, a new kind of strength, a presence that didn't need validation. Middle-aged, working-class men, tired of the circus of politics, were tuning in. They weren't asking about her political record. They were asking one simple question: who is she? It wasn't about political alignment. It was about authenticity. It was about strength that didn't require an audience to hear it. A Vietnam vet posted, "I don't care who she voted for. I care that she looked the machine in the eye and didn't blink." And a retired steelworker commented, "Haven't trusted a politician in 20 years. Don't know if I trust her yet, but I believe she believes what she's saying. That's a start." In an attempt to control the narrative, the mainstream press tried to soften Jasmine's moment. Morning shows replayed the clip, encasing it in commentary, trying to wrap it in a neat, digestible package. But it didn't work. People weren't looking for analysis. They were seeking clarity. And Jasmine gave them exactly that. Without filters, without permission, cable news tried to spin it into a political debate, but they missed something crucial. This wasn't about party loyalty. This was about presence, about someone standing firm in the face of pressure. It was about saying the things so many had been shouting for years. The system fails not because we don't care, but because it refuses to listen. The message was clear, and it resonated. The algorithms caught on, and Jasmine's face flooded every screen. TikTok videos, slow-motion shots paired with swelling orchestral music turned her defiance into a viral symbol. People wanted to know, who is this woman who stood tall when so many would have crumbled? Soon, YouTube thumbnails and Reddit threads asked the questions. Could she lead a movement? Could she run for Senate? Was she the face of truth in a world consumed by surface-level narratives? But perhaps the most important shift was happening on the ground. Real conversations were taking place in diners, union halls, and on online forums where politics had never been a focal point. Men, from Reagan voters to Trump supporters, were rewatching the clip, not for what Jasmine said, but for how she said it. One retired postal worker wrote, "Maybe that's why she's dangerous to them." And a bartender from Arkansas shared, "My dad doesn't talk politics. Last night he asked me to look this woman up. That's never happened before." And then a phrase began to take form, whispered from backyard grills to private text threads. Maybe she's the one who can face the system and stay calm, not because she won a debate or insulted anyone, but because when the system tried to define her, she didn't flinch. What Jasmine did wasn't just a clap back. It wasn't about playing the media's game. No, she rewrote the very rules of a platform built to elevate or tear down. She didn't just answer the question. She transformed the space she was in, reaching into the American psyche, a place so numb it needed a jolt to wake up. She reminded people that courage doesn't always wear a cape. Sometimes it's just stillness, real, unshakable stillness that cuts through the noise. Cameras rolled, producers panicked, and the carefully crafted narrative tried to reshape itself in real time. No one knew what would happen next, but across living rooms, long-haul truck routes, and old union halls, something undeniable shifted. It wasn't a revolution, not yet, but it was a recognition. People were waking up to the truth that in a world of theatrical politics, there was someone who had walked into the lion's den, stared down power, and said, "I see you, but you don't scare me." For the first time in ages, people believed that truth might still be possible on live TV. The clip kept looping, and as it did, the atmosphere in the control room thickened. The fifth person entered, clutching a folder no one dared to open. Jasmine's voice cut through, flat and fierce. "The truth cannot be silenced. No matter how many cameras you set or how many laughs you script." The room fell into a stunned silence. The usual buzz of chatter disappeared, replaced by disbelief. These were seasoned professionals, people who had survived wardrobe malfunctions, protests, and even lawsuits from sitting senators. But this was different. "This isn't the show," said Diane Renier, VP of Segment Strategy, arms crossed and knuckles white against her cuffs. The room was tense. Dan Hollister, the executive producer of The View for 7 years, leaned in, his elbows pressed against the oak table. "She didn't go off script," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She rewrote the script." A nervous laugh broke the silence, quickly swallowed by the weight of what was happening. Conrad Ellis, president of daytime programming, exhaled sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" Dan didn't raise his head. "We built a machine, a rhythm," he said, his voice almost mechanical. "Conservative guests come in, argue, defend, get rattled. The panel pushes back. The audience claps. It's a viral moment, a performance. Predictable. She didn't play her part." Conrad, clearly frustrated, but not yet angry, slammed his hand on the table. "So what? She was boring." "No," Dan replied, his eyes finally meeting theirs, a cold edge to his voice. "She was undeniable." The word hung in the air, resonating with an almost unnatural clarity. At the far end of the table, Olivia Chen, the social engagement director, flipped her iPad around to reveal the numbers. "We're at 12.4 million views across TikTok, X, and YouTube Shorts in under 10 hours. Comments are 78% positive. That's unprecedented." "Positive?" Diane asked, a frown etched on her face. "From who?" Olivia scrolled through the data, her voice steady. "Veterans groups, independents, blue-collar pages in Ohio, Missouri, Kansas, and trending in Canada for some reason. Someone called her the steel spine of Texas." Conrad rubbed his temples, looking worn out. "What's the real issue here?" Brad Jansen, the legal representative from Standards and Practices, spoke up, his tone cool and controlled. "That she did too well, that people actually liked it, that they listened." Diane couldn't hold back anymore. "She cracked something open. She didn't raise her voice, didn't insult anyone, didn't lose control, and somehow it made our people look like they did." Pacing, she continued. "That clip doesn't look like a debate. It looks like an intervention." The room went silent. Max, a young junior producer, cleared his throat, his voice small but clear. "We thought we invited the viral firebrand. You know, Twitter wars, snappy comebacks, big earrings, bigger volume." "She wore no makeup," Diane remarked, almost offhand. "She wore a pin of her grandmother," Olivia chimed in, her voice a little softer this time, almost reverent. Conrad frowned, still trying to wrap his head around it. "So, what the hell do we do now?" "Damage control," Brad said quickly, his voice sharp to the point. Spin, Dan shot back, his tone cool. But make it subtle. No, Olivia said, cutting through the chatter. Anything we say will backfire. She's not trending because she won an argument. She's trending because people feel like we lost the right to question her. Conrad blinked. Is that what we're dealing with now? Rights? Dan shook his head. It's about recognition. She told the truth, and people felt it. The screen behind them flickered again, and there she was. Jasmine's piercing stare, her voice unwavering. The truth cannot be silenced. People think we ambushed her, Olivia said quietly, almost as if she was thinking aloud. Conrad waved it off. Didn't we? The question stung, but no one spoke it aloud. They all knew what the View had become, a controlled chaos. Conflict was part of the show, part of the recipe for the viral moment. No one really got destroyed. They were either softened or thrown into the fire. But Jasmine Crockett, she was different. She absorbed everything they threw at her and then turned it into something they couldn't control. Max, barely above a whisper, spoke the truth no one wanted to admit. I thought Whoopi was supposed to own that room. Dan's voice was steady. She usually does, but not today. Not with Jasmine. Olivia finished the thought, but she blinked. The room went quiet. They all remembered it. Whoopi's brief lapse, the moment she faltered, a shift, a change, and suddenly it wasn't about the View anymore. It was about Jasmine. Outside, the cameras circled like vultures. Inside, the inbox screamed, but not in outrage, not in panic, in questions. Why was she treated like a threat? Why didn't they just listen? Why did she feel like the only one telling the truth? The internet hummed like a beehive cracked open. She didn't pitch, didn't sell, didn't sparkle. She stood, in fire, didn't flinch, and every word she spoke carved itself into the moment like stone. Something shifted, something ancient, something real. Do we bring her back? Conrad asked. A pause, a scoff. She wouldn't come, Dan muttered, but Diane saw it. She doesn't need to come back, she said, because America might follow her out the door. No hashtags, no spin, just silence. The kind that knows it saw something it can't unsee. And far from the studio lights, in a diner no influencer would post, a cracked TV played her voice. 3 men, 3 lives, 1 truth, and not a single sip of coffee. They weren't friends, just men orbiting the same coffee counter out of routine and caffeine dependency. But today they were transfixed. Because Jasmine Crockett was on screen, and this wasn't just another punditry blooper reel. It was a rupture. The truth cannot be silenced, she said. And for once, a politician wasn't trying to sell something. She wasn't running a brand campaign. She was running on nerve. The mechanic muttered, "She wasn't selling anything either." Exactly. That's why it hit different. These weren't the usual performative spats that make cable news tolerable. This was a woman entering the coliseum of corporate media and refusing to perform. She didn't yell, didn't flinch. She made everyone else look like they were acting. The vet stirred quietly. She reminds me of my old CO in 71. She didn't have to shout. Just gave you a look. I'll walk into hell, but I won't blink. In Youngstown, union retirees sat under a dusty American flag. The same guys who once called cable TV brain poison were now locked in. I hate this show, one grunted. Then why are we watching it? 'Cause she's not them. And that's the headline, folks. Jasmine wasn't just a guest. She was a glitch in the system, and America noticed. He was just a janitor in Arkansas. No cable news, no Twitter. But he had a burner phone and a gut that knew when something real hit the airwaves. He flagged down a teacher on her break. You want to know what courage looks like? He hit play. Jasmine Crockett appeared, still as a stone in a storm. Eyes fixed, voice steady. In Tennessee, the barbershop crowd, usually roaring with debates, was dead silent, not out of fear, out of something rarer, respect. "I'm not here for applause," Jasmine said. "Silence helps no one." In rural Montana, two brothers who hadn't spoken since the last election sat next to each other again, each watching the clip, until one broke the silence. She ain't like the rest of them, and that was it. She wasn't selling hope. She was hope, or at least the memory of it. It wasn't her volume that drew attention. It was the lack of it. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice, yet somehow she raised the stakes. As Whoopi Goldberg deployed the panel's most practiced defenses, Crockett didn't counter. She dismantled methodically, calmly, devastatingly. In doing so, she upended a format designed for spectacle. The audience expected sparks. What they got was steel. The reaction was immediate and, for many, unexpected. Working-class men, often immune to political charm, found resonance in her presence. She reminded them not of politicians, but of people who get things done, of nurses, factory shift leaders, the old-timers who fix things without boasting. And suddenly it wasn't about left or right, it was about real. At a diner in Kansas, the question wasn't about policy, it was about permission. Could someone like Jasmine Crockett run for president? The answer, delivered without irony, was no. But not because she wasn't qualified, because she didn't play by the unspoken rules. She hadn't auditioned for the American spotlight in the usual way. She hadn't bartered likability for legitimacy. She simply told the truth, and the machinery didn't know what to do with her. On a conservative radio station in Des Moines, the airwaves paused for her. Not with fanfare, but with silence. A silence that spoke volumes. It wasn't a political stunt. It was cultural resonance. She wasn't Democrat or disruptor. She was a mirror, and America, long fractured and fatigued, found itself looking. It wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett went on The View expecting tough questions and a 2-minute viral clash. Instead, what America got was a seismic shift in political tone, a quiet, collected defiance, an unshakable stillness. Over the next 72 hours, Crockett's segment exploded, not among the usual liberal base, but in places campaign managers rarely poll. Truck stops, gun shows, union halls. Her clip outperformed progressive sound bites by a margin of 3-1 among independent and center-right viewers. No rebrand, no softening, just raw presence. One ex-coal miner in West Virginia summed it up best. She ain't performing. She's testifying. The real story isn't that she went viral. It's that the people who shared her message had long stopped believing anyone in power was listening. Until now. In a political media landscape saturated with talking points and tribal allegiances, Representative Jasmine Crockett accomplished the rarest of feats, authenticity. Following her appearance on The View, Crockett's calm rebuttals and unshakable demeanor defied traditional political theater. Analysts on MSNBC debated her status as a rising progressive leader, while Fox News scrambled to craft a coherent opposition narrative. Both failed to contain the public response. Across multiple states and communities, audiences reported a shared sentiment. She didn't sound like a politician. She sounded like a truth teller. In private spaces, churches, coffee shops, union halls, the reaction was uniform. People believed her. And in an era where trust in elected officials has reached historic lows, belief is currency no algorithm can manufacture. Breaking. Truth accidentally aired on national television. In an unexpected turn of events, daytime TV panel accidentally features person who is not a cartoonish caricature. Jasmine Crockett, a congresswoman with no apparent desire for viral fame or media training wheels, spoke calmly and clearly. And America is confused. Media consultants are urging calm. "We believe this anomaly will pass," one said, while aggressively refreshing polling data. However, early signs indicate mass outbreaks of independent thought, especially among demographics previously believed to be inert. In response, several networks are considering replacing live guests with deepfakes, just in case. Call and response inspired, rooted in justice language. Can I get a witness? Because Jasmine Crockett walked into that studio and didn't bow. She didn't break. She didn't beg. She carried names that never made the news. She carried stories our systems forgot. And when they tried to shrink her down to sound bites and segments, she said, "No, not today." She didn't raise her voice. She raised the temperature. Didn't preach a sermon, but we heard one anyway. Because when truth walks in, lies scatter. When dignity shows up, the script falls apart. She stood tall and the machine blinked. She made them listen, not clap, not cheer, listen. And beloved, once you hear the truth like that, you can't unhear it. Amen. Jasmine's words don't just vanish when the segment ends. They take root. They burrow into places you wouldn't expect, like the kinds of living rooms where people barely get a moment to breathe, or late night drives when you're just trying to get home. People who don't ask for change because they know better. But when Jasmine speaks, it's like the whole room straightens up. She's not just talking to a camera. She's speaking for someone who's been waiting for someone to say, "Hey, this isn't right." And that's powerful. It's not about screaming. It's about being real. Jasmine's rebellion isn't some fiery rant. It's honest, clean truth that cuts straight through. And that's what makes her dangerous. Not to the people, but to the game. She doesn't play it, and because of that, she wins. Not with hype, not with buzzwords, but with grace. And that kind of grace, it's unforgettable. What's the takeaway? Simple. Truth still works. Standing by what you believe in, that lands. And sometimes one person saying what everyone else is afraid to can change more than a million tweets ever will. Jasmine didn't aim to win the crowd. She didn't need everyone to be convinced. What she sought was far more profound, a reminder that trust, the kind that is truly earned, is a force that still matters. And in a world filled with noise and division, one woman standing tall in a hostile environment proved that change doesn't always come from force. Sometimes it comes from simply refusing to bow. This wasn't just her victory, it was a beacon of possibility. If one woman with nothing but her voice and her integrity could shift the course of a conversation, imagine what we could achieve when we stand together. The system may forget, the spectacle may move on, but the moment she spoke those words, "I don't carry my skin like a weapon, I carry it like a witness," that moment will live in the hearts of all who have ever been overlooked or silenced.